Welcome back, folks, to the Right Path podcast, where being an author, an actual author, still matters. This is the podcast. It's for authors. It's about authors. It's done by an author. But, folks, this is where we share our journeys. This is where we explore our creativity. And this is where we examine the why behind it all. Folks, our guest today is a gentleman who I have had the absolute pleasure of interviewing before on a different podcast, and I am absolutely pleased as punch that he's decided to come onto this one and talk to us today about his upcoming book. Please welcome to the show. He's an entrepreneur, he's an inventor, he's a coach, he's a vocalist, amongst many other things, and we're going to let him tell you about some of these other ones. But he's the author of The Guardians of Grit, which I cannot wait to tell you more about. Folks, please welcome David Osk to the program. David, how you doing today?
Hey, man, thank you. That's a very kind intro. And yeah, really honored to be here, truly.
Yeah, it's great to have you on again, brother. I'll tell you what, you have so many different things you could talk about on so many different podcasts. I am just blessed that you're here to talk about your book today. But tell everybody a little bit about the backstory. Who is David? What are you about, brother?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I remember years ago, I heard a lady that I worked with when I was working at Verizon Wireless, and she said, some people earn their MBA and some people earn their LBA, life by accident. And what's interesting is I feel like so much of my life kind of looks a little accidental, and at the same time, I have the luxury at 51 years old to look backwards and see how, man, there's so many times, moments, and seasons when I honestly felt like God had His hand pressing on me and holding me in those places for a while that I needed to be, and where I didn't think that I was necessarily thriving or growing or, living my best life or whatever you want to call it, right? And I look back and I realize there's absolutely no mistakes whatsoever. And so part of my story, I'll make it real fast. Grew up in a little town in Minnesota, Glenwood, Minnesota, and moved to Nashville, like a million other people do to be famous, and so on. And I'm a vocalist. It's one of those things that's just so near and dear to my heart. This year I just released a new song. Everybody knows it. It's Open Arms by Journey, but I actually recorded it in English and Italian. And
Wow.
I'm going to be releasing another version, the full Italian version here in 26. But here's the funny thing, you might imagine, you move to Nashville like a lot of other folks and you start jumping into music, and of course it's fun. I mean, there's so much talent and opportunity and things like that here. But the lifestyle, of a musician, and especially someone who performs a lot, is not something that many people really enjoy. Unless you can kind of jump from, A to Z rather quickly and have, a bit of comfort. But most of the time, if you're going to, get out on the road and just, get out there, you're going to be bootstrapping it, like everybody else, and 99% of everybody. And I realized rather quickly, especially, when Lisa and I got married and started having kids, that I didn't want that lifestyle and I didn't want the income insecurity. And what was fascinating during that time is um, I'll put it this way, some entrepreneurial tendencies that I had nurtured even in high school started to kind of emerge. And I realized, wow, I don't need to be in some little box. So I kind of started dabbling in some areas, and it was amazing how, an opportunity took off here and one took off there and one took off here. And I realized I didn't need to focus on just one thing. And it's so it's turned into a life that is I'm grateful for, and it's not without a bunch of hardships, right, like everybody else. At the same time, I'm so grateful to have landed a product in 3,700 stores and counting, and just licensed another one to Lennox, a thermostat guard that has a combination lock with a backup key. I get to do some music still. I lead an entrepreneurial mastermind group, do some coaching. And in fact, I didn't mention this to you. I just started working with a company called Strategy Simple, a data company. And I'm just basically partnered with them because they helped my other business so much. And we were able to, pull up intent-based data on people that searched for anything yesterday in any zip code. And it's absolutely wild, what's possible and
Wow.
what's out there. So
Yeah.
I love a life of variety, and of course I'm pretty passionate about what we're talking about today too. So yeah, that's me.
This is why I don't try to intro you, brother. I just go, you know what, David, tell every, tell everybody what's
It's a
coming.
lot.
Oh my goodness. And you haven't even covered it all. You know what I mean? Because you've got your hands in so many other things too. And I love that you have this many interests and you have this kind of talent because I mean, there are people who would love to be able to do any one of those things for what you're
Well,
doing them. And I mean, you're doing this whole gamut of stuff and doing it well. Uh,
well,
every time I
thanks.
talk, you impress, man.
Well,
every,
I
every time.
appreciate that. And it's again, I don't want to paint some picture that it's, all roses because there's days I'm like, man, why did I do this to myself? Why did I sign up? But at the same time, I feel like I'm living a life that's authentic to my wiring. And I like variety and I'm okay with a high level of things on my mind. And, sometimes the pendulum swings a little wide, but at the same time, yeah, I'm grateful.
Love it. Well, this is, and again, I mean, my goal is to have you on every podcast I have. I think I'm just going to try and, because then I think we might start scratching the surface of how well-rounded you are. But
Well,
for this one, this is the Right Path podcast. This is about, your author side. This is
yeah.
about the book, okay, that you've been putting together, Guardians of Grit. So, I mean, on every podcast in the world, they're going to go, so what made you write a book? But
Yeah.
there's a story behind this for
Yeah.
you,
Every
and
time.
there's
Yeah.
a thing here. So, what is it
Yeah.
about David that said, hey, this is who I am. This is what's boiling underneath the surface. I want to put it in book form. Tell us about this process.
Yeah. So I grew up in a family where, fatherhood, like my dad was just so intentional. In fact, based on an essay that I wrote as a junior in high school, he won Father of the Year, or I'm sorry, third place, Father of the Year in Minnesota. And
Wow.
my dad is well, he retired now, but he a metal fabricator, woodworker, just incredible talent. And at the same time, the if you asked him, what was his main mission in life, it was be a husband and be a dad. And he was so intentional, with my siblings. I've got an older brother and an older sister. I'm the youngest of three. And so I'll be honest, that's the genesis, right? I mean, there was not a day that my dad did not hug us, tell us both of my parents for that matter, but say I love you, prayed with us. And I'm talking until, I graduated high school. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, even as a 17, 18-year old, dad's sitting on the floor, next to my bed and talking to me at night, like, hey, what's up? How's your day? And just checking in and praying with us and so on. So to have that modeled, was really powerful. I didn't know any different. Well, you might imagine, right? You get out in life and you start hanging out with people who didn't get any of that, right? Their dad took off, right? The families were fractured or maybe worse, right? They were abused or something like that. And so I really feel like, whatever, it might sound sexist. I don't think so. I think anybody who hears this would probably agree if they kind of dug a little bit. But I think that everything rises and falls on whether men love and lead well and whether men don't. And you might imagine something you're never going to hear someone say, right? You're never going to hear somebody say, "Gee, I wish my dad didn't love and lead our family so well." Right? You're never going to hear somebody say that. In fact, the opposite of that might be the deepest ache of anybody's heart. And so, well, what does that look like? What does that really mean? What are the legs on that kind of a, statement that can seem all kind of goosebumpy and, lofty and this and that. But what does it look like? So, again, it looks like a lot of things. And so the book that I'm writing, of course, you could write, some kind of a treatise or encyclopedia on fatherhood, right? That's not what this is. For me, you've heard me say this quote before. The book can largely be summed up maybe as an umbrella with this Benjamin Disraeli quote. And I love it. And in fact, I was introduced to this quote by my dear friend, Dr. Andy Garrett. He's a clinical psychologist, and we work really closely together. But the quote is this: the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I tell you what, what would it look like, for a father, to, as his, this book is for fathers and sons, obviously overlap here, but I just thought I would niche down and really, speak to the heart of a man. But what would it look like as an, age appropriate, conversations, unfold where the posture of a father's heart is to mine for gold in his son? And I'm, okay, what does that mean? Well, what is it that makes up his son? What is it that makes up a person? Right? Well, that's you got to start kind of identifying the lanes or the channels or the authenticity avenues, as it were, that have been woven into somebody. Things like, what do you value most of all in this life? So if you're talking to your 16-year-old, and most people, if you've been in a corporate setting anyway, you've probably done, what's called a core values assessment. Well, what is that? Well, in the English language anyway, there's, maybe 75, words that describe our values, and there's some overlap, of course. But here's what's fascinating. If you're in a room of 10,000 people and you do a core values assessment and you tell everybody in that room, okay, there's 75 words on your page, put a check mark next to the ones that resonate with you. Now narrow that down to, 20. Now narrow that down to 10. Now narrow that down to 5 or 6 maybe and put them in order. They're going to be really, really different. Rory, if you and I did a core values assessment, they're going to be different. The hierarchy of the things that rise to the top for you versus me, not that we don't, have the rest of the values, but the things that are really front and center, it's amazing how those are very different. Well, what is a value? The thing that I value, the thing that my core happens to value most of all in this life is a matrix. How about this? It's a decision-making matrix. So if, for instance, I'm, presented with an opportunity or an obstacle, well, how am I making a decision? And it's really, I mean, it gets really complex because quite often people make decisions how about this? Most of the time, people make decisions absolutely void of what they value. They want to please the person who's in front of them. They don't want to look like an
Hmm.
idiot. They don't want to look scared. They don't want to look this or they. It's all about this extrinsic, people pleasing or whatever that might be.
Sure.
And there's reasons behind that. So for instance, you've got values. Well, then you've got virtues. A value and a virtue are different. A virtue is this idea of an outward focused impact, right? People say the dent in the universe. What kind of dent do you want to have on somebody? Well, what about convictions, right? That's different than a value and a virtue. A conviction is what do you believe is right and wrong? So if you start drilling into things like that, whether it's goosebumps or strengths, right? There's all these assessments on strengths and how you want to apply those things. And what is it? It's a Nissan commercial. What is it that gives your goosebumps? What is it that puts that lump in your throat or makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up, like in a good way I'm talking? Well, what is it that breaks your heart? What is it that just pisses you off? Excuse me, right? What is it that is, what problem in this world do you want to solve? What is it that lights you up? I mean, there's so many things that are on an internal level, let alone external, right? With looks and size and all kinds of various, attributes that if we start mining for gold, and then as a father, we start to name those things, right? Call those things forth. And then we start to validate those things. And then we start to employ those decision-making matrices as those young people get older. Meaning what? You're giving them tools that have been woven into them before the foundation of the world. They didn't choose any of those things, right? We like to think that we're all these really sophisticated adults and I get to choose all of my authenticity and identity. And well, guess what? We didn't choose our skin color. That's a popular one, right? We didn't choose our eye color. We didn't choose our taste buds. We don't choose what time in history we're born. We don't choose what family we're born. Guess what? We don't choose our own personalities. And how do we know that's true? You have 3 kids, is that right?
That's right.
So when your kids were young, you know, they were what? They were, 0 to 5 or 6. They were just living as they would live, right? They're living naturally, normally, authentically, but they were very different from their siblings.
Oh yeah.
Very different. You can tell within, weeks or months that their little soul is so different from their sibling. And again, all of the other attributes with taste buds and things like that. But the essence, right? Their spirit is so different. And kids are not thinking about identity and authenticity like we are, right? And people pleasing and all that kind of stuff. Until what? Until life happens, right? Until they get hurt, until they get teased, until they get, life punches them in the face, as it were. And then they start to question all of the things that are natural and they start to play a role, with, well, this gets better attaboys or this gets an applause when I do this. And if I do this, this is when I get laughed at or mocked or, you know, whatever the, negativity is. And, you've probably heard that term self-actualization,
For sure.
when teenagers, right? We all get the teenage years when they're getting all rebellious and this and that. And but that can happen, go on for many years. Well, why? What's going on there? Well, part of it is a very normal process that everybody has to go through to kind of stand on their own 2 feet. Where do I start and end? And where does mom and dad or my siblings or anybody else start and end? And where's my place in this world? And how do I navigate, being me and them being them? And how do I even know if I'm being me? Right? So here's something else that I think is really fascinating that is so core to the Guardians of Grit book, right? And I'll get into the whole grit and resilience thing in a little bit, but Dr. Andy largely has such a big, I don't know, big hand in this book. And he uses a phrase quite often that where he says, follow the clues. Well, how do you know you have found your authenticity? How do you know you're living in your identity? Well, how about this? We'll start with how do you know you're not? Well, probably a high level of anxiety, probably maybe even depression. How about this? Feeling stuck, right? You feel like, just generally you get up and you're not living a life that you really want to live, but you don't even know what that life might be. You're avoiding certain people, certain places. It's amazing the negative side effects, when someone has that big question mark. I mean, they just have a general sense of insecurity that really runs amok.
Hmm.
Well, how do you know you found it? Well, there's some clues there, right? You start walking into a room and you're not thinking, okay, now like your mind isn't playing tricks on safety and you're worried about saying something to this person or looking stupid over here or all this kind of thing. You're walking in with the sense that, hey, who needs David Osk right now? Like, who can I love? Who can I lift up? Who needs me just to sit with them and ask questions? Like, you're not looking for anything. You have a general sense of fullness. You understand this is who God made me to be. These are the types of conversations that light me up. This is where I feel comfortable. This idea of feeling genuine, normal, natural, authentic. All those things start to become front and center as opposed to anxious, avoidant, stuck, apathetic, and those types of things. So the book is really uh, really to, I guess, maybe draw a blueprint of these things to help fathers understand these concepts for themselves so that what? Well, they can do the same thing for their sons because you cannot give away something you don't have.
Okay. I mean, you unpacked a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. I love that though. The now I've heard a little bit of this before because you and I have had a chance to talk, but I know our listeners have not. So
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I'm asking questions that even if I ask you something I've asked you before, remember it's different listeners on
Yeah,
this
that's
program,
right. That's right.
for sure. But when okay, you're writing this book, you're putting this out there. We're talking about things that happen in daily life. You're bringing our attention to them,
Yeah.
right? And you're saying, hey, this is already happening, but notice this, notice what's happening, and then maybe notice why. And so the book itself is sort of let's get into why this is happening. Is it a self-help? design type of book? Like, hey, once you recognize your behavior, maybe you can change it, or is it more of a educational, type of book? Like, here's why you're doing these things. Maybe speak to that a little bit.
That's a really great question. It's funny. I don't care for the term self-help, but at the same time, I kind of get it.
Sure.
You know,
Personal
it's
development. There you go. Maybe.
yeah, yeah. And I guess if I were to maybe pick a more appropriate genre, it might be something akin to I want to breathe life into men, right? I want the dads. Yes, this is for sons, but I really want dads to understand that they are made of awesome, that they are made of eternity, that they are made of something that was foundational before, the universe was the universe, that they're made in the image of God, right? Before, and I don't want to get all theological here, but either that's true or none of it is. So if God says, I made man in my image, well, boy, we better get the shovel out and start digging because I mean, talk about a clue there, right?
Right.
And talk about the longing of our heart, right? We were made for more. I was made for greatness. I mean, it's so in all reality, I don't know necessarily what genre this is, but I want guys, men from the top down to understand there is so much more to you that has been written, with the pen of eternity that if you start to identify and anchor to and do the same for your son, your life is going to get so much more interesting and better and heroic and courageous and missional as opposed to I'm trying to pass time, medicate as much as I can so I don't feel insecure and anxiety, and hopefully I just won't completely blow it, which is most men.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm, in some ways the voice crying out in the wilderness, like, gentlemen, look up, look within here. There's so much more going on here. The stories of castles and knights and kings, that's the real story. Those aren't fairy tales. That's exactly what you're longing for. And if you're not operating inside of that narrative, the larger story, you're going to feel like you're missing out on life. And of course you are. And so I think, that's it sounds lofty, but in the book, I get down pretty granular so that they can understand some concepts on a pretty, touchable level.
Sure. One of the questions I usually ask in this program, and you led me right to it, so I appreciate that. Fantastic segue, actually, is in terms of when people write a book. When I wrote my books, I'm picturing who I'm writing them to. I'm writing them for or to somebody, and so especially folks who work in the men's space.
Yeah,
We can talk to men, we can talk to fathers, we can talk to a particular person, we can talk to sons, we can talk to sons who are going to become fathers. There's a plethora of different people that we know can benefit from the book. So that's
sure.
not the question. The question's really, when David's writing the book, who's David writing the book to or for?
Yeah, yeah. And if I heard somebody say the other day, who's your avatar? Like who you going after? And you know what? If I could paint a picture of a man that, if I were sitting at Starbucks and I see someone there sitting with his son, and his son maybe he's in seventh or eighth grade, and this guy is, say he's working for a tech company and he got the afternoon off and he's like, man, I need to go spend some time with my son and just hang out. I don't really know what to talk about because, my dad left when I was growing up, but I just know I need to and I want to because I love him so much. But I don't really know what to even say here. I guess we could go throw the ball around and, that kind of thing. But, I want to raise him. I don't want him to be like me, with regards to just kind of existing and paying the bills and, you know, just kind of living life. I want him to, I know there's more. I've tasted more. Well, what is that? And I really, ultimately, I want a man to read this book and have a deeper concept of who he is in his own family and who he is for his wife. By the way, I read something the other day, and they said that there was a study that came out that they surveyed successful men, and it was men who were still married after I think it was 18 years or something like that, who made it might have been 100 grand a year or something like that or more. It wasn't like crazy successful, but decently they're winning. And the number one denominator in all of that was how well the father loved his wife. So the number one way you can love your son is actually to love the socks off your wife. And here's the funny thing though, like, it's you cannot give away something you don't have. So if you're going home at night, you know, looking to by the way, I heard our pastor a while back say most marriages are like two wood ticks. They're just trying to suck the blood out of each other. And we've all been there. But sadly,
Yeah.
when you feel that emptiness and so on, you're thinking all the fairy tales, right? The husband is the knight in shining armor and is going to solve all of his wife's problems and fulfill her every need. And the man is thinking the same thing. And it's like, oh gosh, this isn't going really well. Well, how about this, right? You read a book where you feel like God introduces you to yourself, and he validates those things that he wrote in you, and he says they are good. And you have how about this? You have a shield, a crest that has your attributes emblazoned on it, so that when you forget, right, you look at your shield and you're like, oh man, I forgot this is who I am, because we forget every morning, by the way. And and really you have a plumb line that has a description on it that you anchor back to. You know where the center of the road is. You know when you're in the ditch, and you start to operate from a set of coordinates like a GPS system, as opposed to licking your finger, going whichever way the wind blows. So you operate that like that with your wife, with your son, the same continuity and integrity. And I'm not talking moral integrity, I'm talking structural integrity, in your work and friendships and things like that, right? When you start to identify these things, the scaffolding that makes up your inner constitution and the way you kind of self-actualize starts to bleed out very naturally, in whatever environment you're in. And by the way, it's something that Dr. Andy said, which I loved. I'll go back to the coordinates thing. So he made a statement one time. He said, David, or he asked me, he said, David, do you know what the difference between magnetic north and true north is? Well, magnetic north is a compass, right? So if you're
Right.
walking through the wilderness and you're looking at your compass, it's based upon the magnetic field around it. It's always trying to look for north, right? It's getting really close, hopefully. But where true north is a set of coordinates, it doesn't change. It's literally a pinpoint spot, on the map, like a GPS coordinates. So that's one thing that I'm trying to get across in this book is, what would it look like for a man to understand his true north coordinates? Why am I different from my brother? Why am I different from my coach, my teacher, my pastor? There's obvious overlap in all of that, but there's so much uniqueness that we can label, that we can name, that we can anchor to and operate from, that is so unique to who we are on every single level. And I feel like here's another clue, by the way. We've got a fingerprint, right? That's unique. We've got a retina scan that's unique. We've got DNA that can't be replicated. Well, what does that what's that clue mean, right? There's a clue from eternity just saying, "Hey, how about grab the shovel and start digging?" And it's how about this? I'll make one more point on that vein is what's one of the worst things a father can say to his son? Why can't you be like your older brother?
Hmm.
I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine just
Yeah.
ripping the heart out of a younger boy who can't live up to his older brother's expectations? Why can't you be like him? Well, what is he saying in that, right? You are a mistake. You're not good enough.
Right.
And so again, the opposite of that is what? I love you just the way you are. And guess what? We're going to get the shovel out every single day and mine for gold so that you can anchor to the man inside of you that God is growing up and wants you to be. And you don't have to live for my approval. You don't have to live for your teacher's approval. You can live from a values-based place inside of you and start making decisions, based upon that. What type of a man do you want to be?
Yeah.
Man, I want to get behind that.
Love it. You've mentioned God and your faith quite a bit today, and just because I know you, I already know that that's part of who you are. And obviously, your faith's very important to you. Is that something that is in the book as well? Is the book sort of faith based, or did you leave that
Yeah,
out, or did you double down on
no,
that? How'd you address
yeah,
that?
yeah. So no, I don't think there's no scenario where we understand fatherhood without God. So I don't, again, that's my opinion there. I don't think anything it
Sure.
makes sense otherwise. So I'm not, obviously there's going to be, biblical overtones there. And at the same time, I think I'm painting a picture um, that will probably be rather winsome. And I think there will be a lot of people who might have assumptions as to who they think God is, and they will read this and hopefully maybe smile and exhale just a little bit.
Nice. Where are you with the process in the book right now?
Yeah, so I
How's it
sent
going?
yeah, so I sent the final copy to my editor. So we're just gonna finish some tweaks and then we're gonna start pitching it to some publishers. I might end up self-publishing, but yeah, we're gonna see if we can knock on some doors and get a little bit of help on getting it out there.
Excellent. So you're in the final editing phase.
Yeah.
All right, that's wonderful. I've been through all of those phases, and oh my goodness, that's not a
Yeah.
fun one.
No, and I'll be honest, this has been a 2 year process. This might be the
Ah,
hardest thing I've ever done. Like I mean
wow.
it's and there's so much that you want to say in the book and you're like, man, this is not an encyclopedia. So what is it that is appropriate for, I don't know, I think it's right around 175 pages. So what is it that's appropriate for this book for this time where I'm not trying to cram in all kinds of different thoughts. So we had to kind of weed some stuff out because I had way too much information in there. So yeah.
No, I hear you. Now, whenever we sit down and we're like, all right, we're going to write a book, we have an idea in our minds, right? This is what
Yeah.
it's going to be like. This is how it's going to end up. And, some people are standing there in a pile of cash. Some people are, standing there receiving an award, a Nobel Prize,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Some people are sitting in a rocking chair reading it, sipping some tea. But everybody has an idea of what it's going to look like when their book is done. I'm curious because, I mean, you've done so many other things that I know you didn't go into this with blinders on or anything.
No,
But
no.
how has everything changed from this is what I thought it was going to be like when I sat down to start writing my book, and here we are 2 years later, and I'm on my final edit. What was what surprised you the most out of that? How does it look different today?
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me was myself and the fact that um how about this? I mean, here, well, Guardians of Grit. You have to battle through the imposter syndrome. You have to
Mm,
battle through, yes, I have things to say. Yes, I have concepts that I would like to explain. And I often do that better, like this when I'm just talking with somebody. And I had never written a book on this level. I have a children's book that was published years ago, but I've never done this before. So I think the biggest challenge was actually myself. I had to really dig deep and get over myself, get over my own ego and be willing to do something that might not be great
mm,
and just keep going. So I think that was the biggest challenge.
nice. As this book comes together, you get through your final edit, you find a publisher, or you decide to do it on your own, or you go with a hybrid. That's all another whole great journey. You're getting ready to go on. I wish you luck on that one. It's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
fun, but I know you'll get through it. What has to occur? What does this have to look like in the end? What has to happen for you to consider this book a success?
Man. So, I think the kind of the mission at hand is really doing some live events.
Oh,
I really want to use this book to maybe open some doors so that I can, go talk to a group of men and do some assessments with them to walk them through some of the curriculum that I kind of have. I'm probably going to have an accompanying workbook through, with it, but I would love to sit in a room, with 40 or 50 guys and go through some of these concepts and help, kind of introduce them to themselves
hmm,
so that they can really start to understand, these concepts, authenticity and identity why and strengths and all these various things so that they can, give away something that they now have and mine for gold in their sons. And I think part of it too is it's amazing what happens when you're um, with other people in a room, right? I mean, yes, you can read a book and it can change your life. But if you read a book and then you show up in a room with other like-minded people who, who, especially on this level, who just really want to be great fathers, there's something that happens there that doesn't happen, on your own. And I think, honestly, part of that is just the simple, biblical passage where it says, "Where two or more are gathered, there am I." And I think just it's a kind of a basic concept on how God operates.
Yeah, love it. Great answer. Great answer. People utilize their books in so many different ways because it isn't just writing the book and then
Yeah.
selling the book. The book is such an enormous and powerful tool for so many other aspects of life. And
Yeah.
I'm not at all surprised that you're already exploring that that
Yeah.
avenue. So that's wonderful. Wonderful to hear. Um,
Thanks.
now, as you've been doing this, is it your intent to put together a movement based on this, do coaching, things like that? I'm just
Yeah,
curious, about that
it's
aspect.
yeah, yeah, and I like that word movement. That's inspiring to me. It's um, so I would say the answer is yes. And I don't it's funny because I think a lot of my life is go big or go home. It's just swing for the fence and that kind of stuff. And I think as I'm getting older, it's like, you know what? Be faithful. Just show up and maybe put down uh some expectations that might be a bit more of a stressor than anything else, and just show up, just keep showing up in a faithful way. So yeah.
Nice. Love it. All right. Well, no, obviously we don't have a date for when the book's coming out because you're still, in that publishing, scenario. But the book itself is going to be out in 2026, I'm assuming.
Yes,
So in this upcoming year. So,
it is.
all right. So when people hear this episode, start looking for it. Okay,
That's
and we'll
right.
see. Before we get to the end here, tell everybody though, if they want to find out more, are you going to do a wait list or maybe contact you for more information? How do they reach you to find out more about the book that is coming but might not be here yet?
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're going to be launching the Guardians of Grit website soon. In fact, I'm launching what's called the Ask Experience, and it's going to be a YouTube channel and podcast. So my last name is Ask, A-S-K, but we're having a little bit of fun with that, and we're going to call it the Ask Experience. So I think everything's going to be probably going there, and so we're just going to have ongoing, content, just to help men be better dads. So I think that's probably where people will go. Of course, if you want to find me right now, as a musician, you can go to davidoskmusic.com. If you need a thermostat guard and want to, how about this? Hey, dads, if you need a thermostat guard to get your kids to stop touching the thermostat, you can go to statguardplus.com. But I do, of course, a bit of various things like we mentioned. But I would say if you want to get a hold of me right now, go to davidoskmusic.com.
Awesome. All right, wonderful. All right, David, you are, I mean, 2 years into the process. You're approaching having this whole project done. What's a piece of advice from you to aspiring authors out there who are not where you are yet?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say two things. If you're going to write a book, commit to it. Like don't stop. Just keep going, and then surround yourself with people who can help you in various capacities. Whether that's helping you get an outline, or even bouncing chapters off people, that kind of thing. And then I would say this: until you're really really close to the end, only tell a few people, and I'm saying maybe not even your family members. Like keep it close to your vest, because it's amazing how there are people out there that are dream killers and some who are not. So anyway, but that's it.
Wow, great advice. Very realistic. Very down to earth. Very gritty advice, which from you makes a lot of sense. So, all right, folks, entrepreneur, inventor, coach, vocalist, and author of the upcoming book, The Guardians of Grit, David Osk. David, thank you so much for coming here today to this
My
show
pleasure.
and talking to these folks about this awesome project you have coming up. And I wish you all the luck in the world with it, brother. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you so much. Thank you.
All right. Folks, this has been another awesome episode of the Right Path podcast, where the truth still matters and words still have power. All right. This is the place for authors who know that every page is a step forward. So let's lift each other up. Let's dust each other off. And you know what? Let's all move forward together.